Marcus Webb was 41 years old when his wife handed his promotion to the man she had been sleeping with for 11 months. For 16 years, Marcus had been the kind of husband who kept the household running without ever asking for acknowledgement. He paid the mortgage early. He coached their daughter's weekend soccer games in the rain without complaint. He fixed what broke, built what was missing, and never once brought a problem home that he hadn't already solved. He had spent 9 years at Halcourt Financial Group, quietly building the firm's most valuable client relationship. A single account that generated $4.2 million in annual revenue for the company. While his wife, Regional VP Diane Webb, took lunches with investors and positioned herself for the C-suite. The day she promoted Ryan Aldis to Senior Director of Strategic Accounts, the role Marcus had built from nothing, the role that had his fingerprints on every contract, she called it a business decision. What Diane did not know was that Marcus was the sole reason her company's biggest client had not walked out the door 6 months ago. And that the man who controlled that relationship had already taken a phone call that morning. She had never been more wrong in her life. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 5:14 a.m. Marcus reached across the nightstand, silenced it without opening his eyes, and lay still for exactly 30 seconds in the way he had every morning for the past decade. Not from exhaustion, from habit. He used those 30 seconds the same way a contractor uses a level, to check for anything off, anything out of alignment, before he committed to the day. The bedroom was quiet. Diane's side of the bed was already empty, sheets pulled back with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waking early for months. He noticed this the way he noticed everything, without remark, without emotion, filing it against the accumulating record of small changes that had begun to form a shape he did not yet want to name. He got up, pulled on a gray long-sleeve thermal and a pair of worn chinos, and went downstairs to start coffee. The kitchen was dim in the pre-dawn light, familiar in the way of a place that had been lived in rather than decorated. Marcus had installed the cabinetry himself, walnut veneer, soft close hinges, exactly the right clearance so the lower drawers didn't catch on the tile. He'd refinished the hardwood floors the summer Callie turned 6, working nights and weekends with a rented sander and 2 tutorial videos, getting it wrong twice before he got it right. The kitchen did not look like a magazine spread. It looked like a home someone had built with their hands, room by room, year by year, because it was. He poured the first cup, black, and stood at the window looking out at the backyard while the neighborhood assembled itself out of the darkness. The magnolia he and Callie had planted 3 springs ago had taken. He could see it from here, already past the fence line, its branches holding their shape in the still morning air. He heard Diane's heels on the stairs at 6:20, a sound so particular to her, heel first, authoritative, the sound of a person who had already made decisions, that he could have timed her commute by it. She came into the kitchen, poured coffee into a travel mug she had bought herself, and checked her phone with the focused attention she used to give him. "Early meeting," she said, not looking up. "I know," Marcus said. "You mentioned it." She looked at him then, just briefly, the particular look of someone checking whether the furniture has moved, and then she was gone. The garage door opened, closed, the sound of her car backing out. The quiet it left. Marcus finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and pulled on his Carhartt jacket from the hook by the door. He slid his legal notepad and pen into the inside pocket. He'd started carrying the notepad 8 years ago when he took over the Garrison Partners account, the largest independent real estate investment trust on the East Coast. And the habit had never left. Every meeting logged, every commitment recorded, every number written in his own hand. He drove a 2014 Honda Accord with a long crease above the rear wheel well from a parking structure column he'd clipped in downtown Baltimore 4 years ago. He had never had it fixed. The car ran exactly as it should, got him where he was going, and announced nothing about who he was. This had always suited Marcus. He had never needed the announcement. The commute took 34 minutes on a clear morning. He used it to think. Not about the morning's meetings, not about the quarterly presentations he had back-to-back from 9 to noon, but about Garrison. About the conversation he had been preparing for 6 weeks. About the variable he had not yet introduced to anyone at Halcourt. He parked in the garage beneath the building at 7:48, rode the elevator to the 14th floor, and walked past the reception desk with a nod to Priya, who was already fielding the phones, and down the corridor to his office. The office had a window that faced north. He had requested south when he arrived, been assigned north, and never asked again. The view was of the parking structure across the street and a strip of sky between 2 buildings. He had put a small potted plant on the windowsill 3 years ago. His daughter had given it to him, told him with the earnest authority of a 9-year-old that the office needed something alive in it, and the plant was still there, healthy in a way that embarrassed him slightly, because he wasn't sure he deserved credit for it. He opened his laptop, navigated to the Garrison Partners file, and began reviewing. 4 years ago, Marcus had flown to Charleston on 3 hours' notice to sit across from Edward Garrison himself, 74 years old, 4th-generation real estate. The kind of man who shook your hand and decided in the first 30 seconds whether he was going to work with you or not. 3 other advisors from competing firms had been in the building that week. Edward had chosen Marcus, not because Marcus gave the best presentation. Because when Edward mentioned at the end of the meeting that his oldest son had just lost a significant position in a messy restructuring and that the family was managing it, Marcus had said, "I'm sorry. Those kinds of losses take longer than people expect." He hadn't pivoted to business. He hadn't offered solutions. He had simply acknowledged what Edward had said like it was the most important thing in the room. Which to Edward Garrison it was. That was the beginning of a relationship that now represented $4.2 million in annual revenue for Halcourt. Marcus managed it personally. He knew Edward's assistant's name. He knew Edward's son David had since rebuilt and was running the family's commercial division. He knew that Garrison Partners renewed their contract every 18 months, and that the next renewal window was 9 weeks away. He also knew, because Edward had told him directly in a phone call 3 months ago, that Garrison was evaluating a significant expansion of their advisory services, an expansion that would triple the account value if structured correctly. Edward had said, in his measured Charleston way, "Marcus, I want to be clear that this conversation is between us. I trust your discretion." Marcus had given him that. He had not told Diane. He had not told the executive team. He had written it in his notepad and carried it in his inside pocket and waited, with the patience he applied to everything, for the right moment. He had not anticipated that the right moment would arrive quite like this. It was Priya who told him, obliquely, the way Priya always did when she was trying to protect someone. She appeared in his doorway at 8:55, just before the 9 o'clock meetings began, and said that there was going to be an announcement at the 10:30 all-hands. Her expression was careful in the way that expressions are when the person wearing them knows something they were told not to know. "What kind of announcement?" Marcus asked. "Leadership changes," Priya said. "I'm sorry, Marcus." He sat with this for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you, Priya," and he meant it. He almost went directly to Diane's office. He almost took the elevator to the 2nd floor, walked past her assistant, and asked her directly in the way that he had always conducted himself. Without performance, without drama, without intermediary. He almost did that. Instead, he opened his notepad to a clean page and wrote a single line. Then he picked up his phone and called Edward Garrison's direct line. Edward picked up on the second ring, the way he always did. "I appreciate you calling," Edward said, after Marcus had spoken for 3 minutes, and then stopped. There was a pause, the particular pause of a man who is measuring something. "I assumed something might be shifting over there. I'd been meaning to reach out. I wanted you to hear it from me first," Marcus said. "I appreciate that," Edward said. "Let me ask you something directly. Is this going to affect the work?" "Only if you want it to," Marcus said. Another pause. Then Edward said, in the quiet, certain way of a man who had been making decisions for 50 years, "I see. I'd like to schedule a call with you and my team for next week. Not with Halcourt. With you." Marcus wrote the time in his notepad. He capped the pen. He straightened the notepad on his desk. At 10:30, he sat in the 3rd row of the all-hands conference room on the 7th floor and listened to Diane. At the front of the room, in a $1,400 blazer she had purchased 2 months ago, announced that Ryan Algis would be assuming the role of Senior Director of Strategic Accounts, effective the following Monday, to support the firm's growth in the Mid-Atlantic region. Ryan was 34 and had been at Halcourt for 3 years. He was handsome in a practiced, effortful way, the kind of handsome that required maintenance. He had handled mid-tier accounts with competence and no particular distinction. He had never sat across from Edward Garrison. Ryan stood at the front of the room and said he was honored and excited and committed to taking the team to the next level, which was exactly the sentence Marcus expected him to say. Diane did not look at Marcus during the announcement. Not once. He stayed in his seat after the room began to empty, watching the last of his colleagues file out, their expressions carrying the careful blankness of people who had noticed something, but had decided not to say so. When the room was quiet, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and went back to his office. He sat down at his desk. He did not move for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began drafting the outline of what he was going to do next. He called his brother Jerome that evening from the back porch, while Callie was at the kitchen table working through a geography assignment. The sun was going down behind the magnolia. The air had the specific stillness of late spring, the kind that arrives without announcement and disappears the same way. "Say that again," Jerome said. "She gave the account to Ryan," Marcus said. "The one I built, the one that's carried 20% of the regional revenue for 4 years. The silence on Jerome's end was long and deliberate. When Jerome spoke again, his voice had the controlled quality of a man keeping something back with both hands. "Tell me where Ryan Algis lives." "That's not what this is," Marcus said. "Marcus, I mean it, Jerome. This gets done correctly, or it doesn't get done." Jerome exhaled. "Fine, then what?" "I've already called Edward," Marcus said. "And?" "He wants a call next week. Not with Halcourt, with me." The silence that followed was different from the first one. Marcus listened to it and recognized it as his brother recalibrating. "Okay," Jerome said. Finally. "Okay, what do you need?" "Right now, nothing. Just stay available." He went back inside, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table next to Callie while she finished her assignment. She was working on a map of South America, filling in country names in her careful, deliberate handwriting. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "do you know where Suriname is?" "Northeast coast," he said. "Between Guyana and French Guiana." She found it, labeled it, and moved on. She did not ask how his day had gone. He was grateful for this. He did not think he could have answered the question without something in his voice giving way. He helped her clear the table after. He checked her work. He turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. Diane was not home yet. He lay in the dark and thought about Ryan Aldis, and what Ryan Aldis did not know, and what Diane had not thought to consider, and how little the people who believe they are winning tend to understand about the geometry of the board they are playing on. He did not sleep badly. He slept, if anything, more deeply than he had in months. He retained Patricia Brennan on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the announcement. Patricia ran a boutique employment law firm in Bethesda with a specialty in corporate wrongful demotion and whistleblower cases. She had graduated from Georgetown Law and had, in the 14 years since, developed a specific reputation for the kind of quiet, methodical case construction that large firms could not match in speed or precision. Marcus sat across from her in a clean, unadorned conference room and laid out his documentation in the order he had prepared it: the account origination records, the performance reviews in which Diane had rated him exceptional for 9 consecutive years, the email chain from 16 months ago in which Edward Garrison had written directly to Diane stating, in language that could not be reinterpreted, that his relationship with Marcus was foundational to Garrison Partners' continued engagement with Halcourt, and the internal communications Marcus had legally preserved from his work laptop, showing that the restructuring decision had been made 6 weeks before any formal performance review of Ryan Aldis had been initiated. Patricia read through the materials in silence. She had the particular stillness of a person who has been presented with something they recognize. "The personal relationship between your wife and Mr. Aldis," she said, when she looked up. "What do you have?" "Enough to make discovery interesting," Marcus said. She looked at him for a moment. "I want to be direct with you. The wrongful demotion case is strong on its own. The conflict of interest angle, a regional VP directing a personnel decision to benefit a person she has a personal relationship with, is potentially a significant liability for the firm, not just for her." "I know," Marcus said. "And the Garrison account? That's a separate matter," Marcus said. "But it's related." He told her about the call with Edward, about the expansion conversation, about the fact that in the 9 weeks before Garrison Partners' renewal window, Halcourt was now going to attempt to service a $4.2 million account through a man Edward Garrison had never met, using a relationship that belonged entirely to the person they had just removed from the role. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Does anyone at Halcourt know about the expansion discussion?" "No," Marcus said. She wrote something on her notepad. Then she looked at him and said, "This is the most straightforward case I've seen in 4 years. Are you prepared for it to be handled completely?" "Yes," Marcus said. "That's the only way I know how to do things." What Marcus did not know, what he could not have fully anticipated, was the particular quality of Diane's certainty in those first weeks. He had known her for 17 years. He had watched her build a career with the focused, relentless efficiency of someone who had learned early that nothing was given and everything was taken. He respected this about her, even now, even having seen what it had cost them. What he had not fully measured was the degree to which certainty, in a person who had always been right, could become its own kind of blindness. She came home the night of the announcement at 9:40 p.m. He was still awake, reading in the kitchen. She moved through the first floor with the practiced efficiency of someone who did not expect conversation and had adjusted her presence accordingly. Keys on the hook, shoes left by the staircase, a brief pause at the refrigerator. When she finally noticed he was in the kitchen, she stopped. "Late night," she said. "I was waiting up," Marcus said. She sat down across from him. She was still in the blazer. In the kitchen light, he could see the specific expression she wore when she had already prepared her answer and was waiting for the question. "You could have warned me," Marcus said. "It was a business decision," she said. "The firm needs someone in that role who is aligned with the direction we're taking the regional practice." "Aligned," Marcus said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. 17 years is a long time to know someone's voice. He heard, underneath the precision of her words, something that was not confidence. Something that was confidence having to hold itself up by its own effort. He recognized it the way a contractor recognizes a structure that is bearing more weight than it was designed for. The signs are subtle. They are there. "All right," he said. She looked at him carefully, searching for something. Anger, accusation, collapse. He offered her none of these things. He looked back at her with the quiet steadiness that had always, he understood now, been the thing she had most misread about him. She went upstairs. He stayed in the kitchen for another 20 minutes, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him. She had not asked about Garrison. Not once. Not a question about the account, the renewal, the client relationship she was now trusting Ryan Aldis to manage. She had built a picture in which Marcus's departure from the role was clean, uncomplicated, survivable. She had lived inside that picture with such completeness that she had never once thought to check whether the ground beneath it was real. It was not real. But she would not know that for another 6 weeks. Ryan Aldis placed his first call to Edward Garrison on a Tuesday morning, 14 days after the announcement. Marcus knew this because Edward told him, with the particular economy of a man who does not waste words reporting on things he finds beneath comment. He introduced himself, Edward said. He told me he was excited to be taking over relationship management for the account and looked forward to continuing the excellent service we'd come to expect from Hal Court. Marcus said nothing. I thanked him for his time, Edward said. There was a pause. Marcus could hear, in the silence, the specific quality of Edward's assessment of Ryan Aldis, not outrage, not contempt, but the absolute, settled indifference of a man who had taken a meeting with someone and immediately understood that there was nothing there to pursue. I'd like to move our conversation to next week if that works, Edward said. My legal team will be on the call. That works, Marcus said. He wrote the time in his notepad. He went back to work. Ryan Aldis appeared in Marcus's office doorway on a Wednesday afternoon 6 days later, which Marcus had anticipated. Ryan was the kind of person who, when uncertain, presented confidence. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, a studied casualness, and said he wanted to connect about the Garrison Partners account, compare notes on the client's preferences and history. Happy to, Marcus said. He waited. Ryan stepped into the office, sat down across from him, and said, with the specific tone of someone who believes he is being gracious, that he understood it was a tough transition and he appreciated Marcus's professionalism. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. Ryan said he was hoping for a warm introduction to Edward Garrison. Something to ease the transition, make the handoff feel seamless. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he said, Edward and I spoke last week. He's in good hands. Ryan nodded, satisfied in the way of a person who has heard what they wanted to hear and chosen not to probe further. Great, Ryan said. Great, I'll reach out to him directly and set something up. He stood. He offered his hand. Marcus shook it. After Ryan left, Marcus sat quietly for a moment. Then he opened his email and composed a short message to Patricia Brennan, attaching 2 documents. The first was a record of Ryan's Wednesday visit and what had been said. The second was a screenshot, legally obtained through his own devices, of a text message Diane had sent Ryan 3 months ago, 7 weeks before the announcement, that read, "Once the transition is done, the Garrison account is yours to manage. Marcus doesn't need to know how long we've been planning this." He sent the email. He picked up his legal notepad. He went to his 2:00 meeting. The call with Edward Garrison's team took place on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of June, 7 weeks before the Garrison renewal window. Marcus took it from a conference room at Patricia Brennan's firm, not from his Halcourt office. Edward's legal team included a senior counsel named James Whitmore and the family's CFO, a woman named Caroline Ang, who had the efficient, precise manner of someone who had reviewed more contracts than most people had read paragraphs. Marcus sat across from them with Patricia on his left and a bound folder in front of him that he had assembled over the previous 2 weeks with the same methodical care he applied to every structural problem. Measured twice, confirmed 3 times, prepared for questions that had not yet been asked. He walked them through the Garrison account's history. The origination meeting, the relationship framework, the 15 service conversations logged over 4 years, the specific language Edward had used in correspondence to Halcourt that tied continued engagement to Marcus's personal involvement. He presented the documentation of the expansion discussion, Edward's words, dated, attributed correctly, and the timeline of events at Halcourt that had preceded and followed it. Caroline Ang asked 2 precise questions. Marcus answered both without referencing notes. Whitmore was quiet through most of it. When Marcus finished, Whitmore looked at Edward's image on the screen. They had patched Edward in from his Charleston office and said, "This is straightforward. We've seen cases where a client relationship is treated as institutional property when it is, in fact, individual," Edward said. "Marcus, I'll be direct with you. Garrison Partners has no interest in being managed by someone we've never met, regardless of the quality of the firm. If you remain at Halcourt in a capacity that allows you to continue this work, we continue. If you don't, I'll need to have a different conversation with my team about direction." Marcus said, "I understand. I'll know more about my situation at Halcourt within the next 10 days. Edward said, "Keep me informed. Then, it's good to hear your voice." The call ended at 10:47 a.m. Patricia let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "The injunction against the personnel restructuring is ready to file. Do you want to proceed?" "Yes," Marcus said. She filed it at noon. Halcourt's general counsel called Diane at 3:15 that afternoon. Marcus was not there for the call, but Jerome called him at 4:00 with the particular energy of someone who had just received information he had been waiting to deliver. "Someone talked," Jerome said. "The filing is public record," Marcus said. "She's been in the general counsel's office for 2 hours." Marcus was driving home. The late afternoon sun came through the driver's side window in long, flat shafts that made the dashboard warm to the touch. He drove with one hand. He wasn't in a hurry. "What does she know?" Jerome asked. "She knows about the injunction. She'll know about the Garrison letter by tomorrow morning when Patricia sends it." The Garrison letter was Edward Garrison's formal notification to Halcourt's executive leadership that the continued engagement of the firm was contingent on Marcus Webb's active management of the account. It was 4 paragraphs, measured and precise. Edward had written it himself, not through counsel, which gave it a quality that legal documents rarely have. It was the letter of a man who had made a decision and wanted it understood. "Jerome," Marcus said. "Yeah, the Garrison account is not leverage. It's not a weapon. It's a client relationship I built because I did the work correctly for 9 years. That's all it is. I know that," Jerome said. I need you to know that, Marcus said, because the next 2 weeks are going to look like something else from the outside, and I need at least one person who understands what it actually is. Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what she's going to say. That you're using the account to retaliate." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why Patricia filed the wrongful demotion case, separately and first. The Garrison matter is a consequence of the decision Halcourt made. It is not something I manufactured." He pulled into the driveway. He sat with the engine off for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling metal in the quiet of the late afternoon. He got out. He went inside. He made Callie's dinner, checked her homework, and sat with her while she watched 30 minutes of television before bed. Diane came home at 10:20. She moved through the house differently now, a tightness in her step that he hadn't seen before. The particular tension of a person who has been given information that is still settling into shape. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him across the island. "You called Edward yourself," she said. "Before the announcement," Marcus said. "He called me first. I returned the call. You've been planning this." He considered that for a moment. "I've been careful," he said. "There's a difference." She was still in her coat, her bag over her shoulder, her keys in her hand. She looked at him with an expression he had seen only once before, on a job site, years ago, watching a structural engineer realize that the foundation report he'd signed off on had missed something that was now bearing weight. The look of a person recalculating too late. "You could have talked to me," she said. "I tried that," Marcus said. For about 8 months. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it, set it in the sink. "I'm going to bed," he said. "We can talk more when your lawyers tell you what you're looking at." He went upstairs. He did not slam the door. He did not look back. The settlement conference took place on the 22nd floor of a steel and glass building on K Street, in a conference room with pale birchwood tables and windows that faced south over the city. Marcus arrived precisely on time, in a dark blue suit he had owned for 6 years, and kept well, with his legal notepad and a pen, and nothing else. Patricia was already there, her documents arranged in 2 neat stacks. She looked at him when he sat down and said nothing, which was what he needed. Halcourt's general counsel came in with 2 associates. The firm's HR director sat at the far end of the table with the expression of someone who would rather be somewhere else. Diane entered last, with her personal attorney, a man named Reston whom Marcus did not know, and sat across from Marcus for the first time since the kitchen conversation 10 days ago. She looked composed. He gave her that. Whatever she was feeling, she had packed it down beneath the same professional surface she had always been good at maintaining. Halcourt's general counsel opened by noting that the firm was committed to resolving the matter efficiently and that they recognized the complexity of the situation given the intersecting personal and professional dimensions. Patricia said, "We're going to simplify this. My client's wrongful demotion claim is supported by 9 years of exceptional reviews, documented client dependency, and internal communications showing that the restructuring decision was made in advance of and separate from any performance review. The conflict of interest claim, an executive directing a personnel decision to benefit a person with whom she had an undisclosed personal relationship, is not a legal nuance. It is a straightforward governance failure. The Garrison letter, which I believe you have all seen, establishes that the account in question, the firm's largest in the Mid-Atlantic region, is individually, not institutionally, retained. If Mr. Webb leaves Halcourt under these circumstances, Garrison Partners leaves with him." Reston said, "We dispute the characterization of the relationship." Patricia placed a document on the table and slid it across. "You may want to review this before we go further." It was the text message chain from Diane's phone, obtained through Patricia's litigation discovery request, conducted within the legal framework of the employment case, spanning 11 months. The first message was dated 8 months before the announcement. The last was dated 4 days before it. Halcourt's general counsel picked it up. He read it. He set it down. He did not look at Diane. The room was quiet. The ventilation system ran behind the walls. Outside, the city moved at its ordinary pace, indifferent to what was happening on the 22nd floor. Marcus did not speak. He had prepared nothing to say, and he said nothing. He had arranged his documents on the table not because he needed to consult them, but because their presence was its own statement, the orderly record of a man who had done the work correctly and documented it at every step. Patricia spoke for 23 minutes. She named every element of the case with the particular precision of someone who has prepared for all of the responses and found none of them adequate. She named the remedies they were seeking: reinstatement to the senior director role with full compensation recovery for the 7-week period, a formal review of the conflict of interest through the firm's governance structure, and a written acknowledgement of the account's origination and management history. She said, "We are not seeking to destabilize this firm. We are seeking a correction." When she finished, the general counsel asked for a 15-minute break. They came back in 12. The terms were agreed to in writing before 2:00 p.m. Marcus drove back to the office alone. He parked in the garage, took the elevator to 14, and walked past Priya's desk. She looked up when she saw him. She started to say something, and then didn't. He gave her a small nod. He went to his office. He sat down. He looked at the plant on the windowsill that his daughter had given him, growing in the morning light from the northern window. He opened his laptop and wrote Edward Garrison an email. 4 sentences. He told Edward that the situation at Halcourt had been resolved, that he would be resuming full management of the account effective Monday, and that he looked forward to continuing their conversation about the expansion framework. He sent it. He opened his notepad to a fresh page. He began outlining his approach for the Garrison renewal meeting. Ryan Aldis left Halcourt 6 weeks later, without announcement, in the manner of departures that are understood to be necessary by everyone in the building except the person making them. He had managed the Garrison account for 43 days, during which time he had scheduled 3 calls. Edward Garrison had taken one, and the expansion discussion had been suspended pending resolution of the firm's internal situation. Diane submitted her resignation 3 days after Ryan's departure, effective immediately. Marcus was told about this by the general counsel, not by Diane. She did not leave a note. She had already begun the process of taking a position with a consulting firm in Boston, which he understood from Priya, who understood it from the HR director, who had mentioned it without realizing the information would travel. He did not call her about it. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in the rooms where it mattered. He heard from Jerome that she had moved to Boston by the end of summer, an apartment, a new position, a city that didn't have the same geography. He heard this and sat with it for a moment, and then went back to what he had been doing, which was helping Callie with a project on the water cycle for her 7th grade science class. They worked at the kitchen island with markers and a poster board and a glass of water that Callie kept accidentally knocking toward the project before Marcus moved it to the other side of the island. "Dad," Callie said, concentrating on her diagram, "how long does it take for water to evaporate?" "Depends on the surface area," he said, "and the temperature. And the humidity." She considered this. "So it's never the same twice?" "The process is the same," Marcus said. "The conditions change." She wrote something down on her poster board in careful purple lettering. He watched her work and felt the specific weight of the moment, not grief, not triumph, not the particular satisfaction of having been right. something quieter than all of those things. He was still himself. He had always been himself. The thing she had miscalculated was not some hidden reserve or concealed resource. It was simply that she had decided what he was before she had thought to ask whether her assessment was complete. She had looked at the used car, the notepad, the Carhartt jacket, the 9 years of exceptional reviews that she herself had written, and she had decided she already knew the full picture. She had not. She had never thought to ask what else there might be. The Garrison expansion contract was signed on the first Thursday of October, representing a 3-year engagement valued at $11.4 million. Marcus received the executed copies on a Friday morning, reviewed them in his office, and filed them in the correct folder in the firm's document system. He wrote the completion in his notepad with the date and time. At 5:47 p.m., he shut down his laptop, put on his Carhartt jacket, picked up his thermos, and took the elevator down to the garage. He drove the 2014 Accord, the crease still above the rear wheel well, exactly where it had always been, out into the early autumn evening. He drove home without hurrying. The road was familiar, the route unchanged, the city moving at its ordinary pace around him. He stopped for groceries. He picked up the specific brand of cheese Callie had been requesting for a week. He drove the rest of the way home with the grocery bags on the passenger seat and the radio on low. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. The magnolia was holding its shape against the evening sky. The porch light was already on. He had set it to a timer 2 months ago, because Callie was old enough now to be home for an hour before he arrived, and he wanted her to have light. He got out. He took the groceries inside. He called Callie's name from the front hall and heard her answer from upstairs. He put the groceries away, put water on for pasta, and got out the cutting board. The kitchen was warm. The magnolia was visible through the window over the sink, the one he could see from where he stood, the same window he had looked out of on an early morning months ago, when none of this had resolved itself yet, and the shape of what was coming was still forming in the distance. He had not hidden from any of it. He had never needed to announce himself. He began to cut the vegetables with the same precision he applied to everything, measured, unhurried, each piece consistent with the last. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the knife and the water beginning to move in the pot. He did not look back. There was nothing behind him worth looking at. The work was here, in front of him, exactly where it had always been. He kept going. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.